And we're recording. So, afternoon, family. I am here to talk about the Truman Commission. The Truman Commission was a report that was commissioned by President Truman around 1946. Now, what's important about this report is the fact that at this time in the United States, there was no Department of Education. So that meant that there was really no governing body that was watching over or producing reports on the efficiency, equity of higher education in the U.S. Now, you had the Bureau of Higher Education that was housed within the Presidential Executive Administration, but not the U.S. Department of Education as we see it now. And so, with the Truman Commission, you have the first report ever of its kind that basically looked at and assessed higher education. I have my notes. I'm going to look at my notes real quickly. So, like I said, U.S. President Truman was looking at the condition of higher education in the U.S. It was chaired by George Zook, which is an interesting person on his own. George Zook became president of Akron University around 40 years old, worked within that for the next 10 to 15 years, and then became president of the American Council on Education in around 1940 or so. 1946 is when the commission was requested. The commission report was requested. And then around 1947, a 6-volume report was then given to President Truman saying, basically, here you go. Here's your report on higher education. And here are our recommendations for education in the U.S. Now, the recommendations are actually very interesting, given the time that they came out. Again, the time is 1947, so we're pre-civil rights. We're still in a segregated era. We're still in Jim Crow laws. But the Truman Commission said, let's get away with all of this. Let's really increase access. But the only way to really increase access is to get rid of all the isms that is hindering access for certain students. So they called for several policies to end, which was then going to have a positive effect on enrollment in higher education. Specifically, it called for the end of racism or segregation in terms of admission. It recognized the value of both, well, then it was immigrants. Today it will be called non-documented, but the immigrant population that was rising, but also specifically the black population that was not getting a real opportunity for admission because of race and ethnicity. So the Truman Commission called for end of race discrimination in regards to admission. It really wanted to see the doors open more for underrepresented populations. Another call that they asked for was the end of anti-feminism movements in higher education. Now, at this time, you've already had the women's colleges, but at this point in the U.S. education, more and more institutions are becoming co-educational. Now, but what that meant was a lot of women were then facing backlash within the classroom as well. And so for women to feel more welcome and for them to have a more equal experience in the classroom, they then called for the end of anti-feminism, both in curriculum and also in admissions. Now, what's key on this is the fact that they were not looking more in the undergraduate population, but more in the graduate population. So I guess the Truman Commission was seeing that for those women that went through the undergraduate experience, it was during the graduate experience that they were facing a huge backlash. Another thing that they were calling for was the end of, this squirrel's getting really close to me, was the end of anti-religious discrimination, or religious discrimination, specifically against Jewish students. So again, we're in wartime, coming out of wartime, but already the backlash against Jewish culture, Jewish people, is already being felt here in the U.S., specifically within education. So the report called for end of religious backlash, and more, I'm trying to get that glare out of my face, but more so for the welcoming of anybody of any religion, which actually is interesting because that goes back to the origins of higher education here in the U.S. One of the big things that they're also known for, the Truman Report is known for, is for the proposal and for the support of community colleges, specifically public community colleges, and specifically free public community colleges. The Truman Commission, in my hand, is starting to get tired. So the Truman Commission recognized that there was a barrier in terms of access because of financial capabilities. So what they wanted was a 2-year college system that would be free, that will allow students to migrate or persist to more 4-year colleges. And so this is not where the birth of the community college is found, but this is where you see a huge support to the executive level of the President of the United States saying, here's the benefit, here's what they do, let's put power and resources behind this. As I stated before, they also recognize the inability to gain access because of financial reasons. So because of that, they actually asked the government to support more financial aid, more federal aid, more scholarships, more fellowships, whatever the case may be, to really make it so that finances were not the reason why people could not go to college. Now, this was just a report. These were just recommendations. But then what you see is those recommendations then having an impact on the Higher Education Act of 1965. Once Brown versus Board was, passed, and then you saw the recommendations come back around. But also when you had the Department of Education get formed in around 1979, 1978, you then saw a lot of these recommendations from 20, 30 years prior to the creation come back around and finally get implemented. I'm talking way too much. I'm about to hit 7 minutes. So this is a short report on the Truman Commission report. If you are interested in this report, please email me and I can send you some links or some reports that I read on it.